Well, just to tell us a little bit about ourselves, not too much because you already know everything. I'm David's mother, and he is my second child. And I read to him a lot when he was little, and I think that that had a big influence on him. And I think that he wanted to write from a very young age. He loved books, loved to read. He always had books under his bed at night. So David was a real reader, right?
And when you started publishing, I was in fourth grade, and I think that was about the same time where I got an interest in reading and publishing and writing. So this is our first collaboration.
Right, our first collaboration. He says there will be no more, but we'll see.
First and last.
We'll see. But I just want to go back for a little bit because it's a funny story. When David was at Meyer Elementary, and I had just had my first book published, Pigs and Good Pigs, which everyone knows. And they had an author come to the school, and I remember the author sort of, I can't remember her name, but her husband was the painter who lived in Hudson, Thomas something. Anyway, the kids are all asking questions, so David is a typical child of someone who was published, says, she says, well, you have a question? He says, yes. He says, are you agented or not agented? Which I thought was a pretty big question. Anyway, so David is going to, for those of you who haven't read the book, David is going to read you a little blurb, just to give you sort of a synopsis of what the book is about.
When the orphanage he called home burns to the ground, 14-year-old Leo and his friends turn to larceny, using their textbook for survival, Harry Houdini's The Right Way to Do Wrong, an expose of successful criminals. This was a real book, which we actually used and features prominently in the book. Grayson, he abandons the life of crime to become the apprentice of a has-been magician named Barzini. With Houdini's help, Barzini is staging a comeback, complete with an improved variation on the bullet catch trick made famous by his arch-enemy Chung-Ling Soo. Barzini wants more than to merely outshine his old rival. He's out for revenge. As Leo struggles to escape his dangerous past, he must confront the possibility that his new mentor may be even more dangerous. Set during the golden age of magic, this spellbinding mystery combines actual historical magicians and the secrets behind their rivalries and illusions with the coming-of-age story of a resourceful young man who must refashion his destiny amid the smoke and mirrors of the world of the magician's apprentice.
Yeah, that was a good blurb. Our book basically introduces, here are our players. We have Leo, who is the young protagonist, who comes with 3 of his friends from an orphanage. When the orphanage burns down in Buffalo, they decide this is their good chance to make a break. So they head to New York City, and they live in abandoned tenements, and they're street thieves. One of them happens across this book written by Houdini, The Right Way to Do Wrong, and they each have a niche. One of them is like a brute kind of a stick-up guy. He doesn't use a gun, he uses a baseball bat. One is crippled, so he becomes like the beggar who begs on the corners. This is 1917, the world's at war. One of them is just a gifted, quick on his feet, a gifted thief. He can reach behind a store counter to grab the cash. And Leo, who is like an invisible pickpocket. He can get his hands into anyone's pocket, lift contents, and the person next to him doesn't even know. That is also what you need to become a magician. Our next character is the main character, Franco Barzini, who likes to refer to himself as the Great Barzini Illusionist. He's a gifted magician, but he never made it to the big time, and he has, it's like killing him for decades that his fellow magician became this world-famous sensation, Chung-Ling Soo, who was a real magician. His real name was William Ellsworth Robinson. He grew up in New York City. His father had a bar, and he was a gifted magician, but even more gifted than that, he was what you would call a magician's mechanic. He could make any of the props to make anyone disappear, to pull off all these amazing stunts that magicians were doing. He, in real life, performed and was always booed off stage because he mumbled. He had very bad teeth, and he mumbled, and people would boo him off stage. But he went to London and he reinvented himself as Chung Ling Soo. He dressed in, as they would call it, Oriental garb. He had on grease paint makeup, he had a braid, and he never spoke a word on stage. So for decades, other than the magicians who were on the inside in the magic world, nobody knew that this man was a barkeeper's son from New York City.
World known as Chung Ling Soo.
Chung Ling Soo, the mysterious Chung Ling Soo. He also had a double life. He had a wife in New York with 2 children who he abandoned to go to London to reinvent himself. Had a girlfriend named Dot Robinson, who became his assistant on stage named Sui Seen. And he had another woman on the side with whom he had a separate family. So people were very busy in those days.
Yeah, so, Chung Ling Soo's key act was actually the bullet catch. So that was his how he ended each show. And the bullet catch, has many variations, but basically the same thing happens every time. Someone points a gun at you and you catch it, usually with your teeth or with your hands or on a plate. And Chung Ling Soo actually died on stage performing this trick. So the official word is that his prop gun malfunctioned, but there's mystery surrounding that too because of certain numbers.
When the coroner ruled it was death by misadventure, and the prop gun misfired because there was a bullet embedded in the scenery that did not come from the prop gun. So there was all this intrigue. Scotland Yard said they received an anonymous letter. When he was shot, he said, "Oh my God, close the curtain, I've been shot." Those are the only time he ever spoke English on stage in decades of performing. And we have a cameo by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was interesting. But this man believed in life beyond the veil. And there's a seance scene in the book, which kind of shows how vulnerable and how gullible he was, that he really believed that he could contact the dead. That's what he
Sure. So writing the book started in 2006. Actually, I just graduated college and I was home for a few months. And my mom had a couple pages. I studied English, so she showed them to me just to read over, and I thought it was interesting. So while I was at home, we kind of worked on this draft together and completed it in a few months. But it wasn't very good. It was all over the place, and it sat in a trunk, basically, until 2009, when we showed it to Holiday House, and they were interested in it, except 2011. So they liked it, but they wanted us to rewrite the whole thing, basically start from scratch. So they liked it, but they wanted something totally different.
But keep some of the characters.
So that's what we did. We agreed to it right away, not thinking how a mother and son collaboration would actually pan out. And it was difficult, actually. So the way
It was difficult, or one of us was difficult.
I think we were both difficult. The way we broke up the work roughly was that we decided my mom would do the bulk of the research, although we both read many books on the era, which is the golden age of magic. If you think of those wonderful posters like the amazing whoever, that was that era. It was when Houdini was performing. So there's a wealth of books already on it. Chung Ling Soo. So we both read pretty deeply, but my mom had the opportunity to go to the Houdini archive at University of Austin, Texas, where my brother was studying at the time. And that was kind of your job. It was your job.
On a visit to go see Bram in Austin, I had discovered that the Ransom Center, which is a world-famous archive, had Houdini scrapbooks, and they had a magician's collection. I mean, there must have been 30, 40 boxes in each collection, and so I had to register, and of course I registered with the name Barzini, And I used characters from the book as my passwords and stuff. And they make you watch a video for a half hour. I mean, this is all archival stuff. It was interesting. You had to wash your hands really well. They had to kind of check your hands. You had to put on special gloves. No pens were allowed in the archive. No, camera you could take, but they yelled at me. I had a different camera, and I didn't know how to turn off the sound feature, so it kept like beep every time I took a picture, and I got yelled at. You can't take your purse in. You can't take anything in. They give you paper to write on. But it was amazing. I was able to photograph letters, correspondence between Houdini and Chung Ling Soo in real life. And it showed their relationship, and their letter writing was like an art. My dearest Houdini, thank you so much, blah, blah, very flowery. And then you get the letter the next month, and it would be, Dear Houdini, I never gave you permission to use that trick in your act. Back and forth, a lot of petty stuff. And that's what Houdini was famous for being petty and accusing his friends of stealing. And one thing we both discovered in our research was that Houdini really stunk as a magician. He wasn't really a magician.
He was an escape artist.
He was like he learned by being a circus performer. And he was an escape artist, and that's what he did.
Right.
He just,
So,
He didn't love his mother, I understand.
No, he did. He was a mama's boy.
well, in any event, while my mom was getting wrapped up in doing more and more research, I was focusing on moving the plot along, getting the outline together, and kind of more the mechanics of how the story was going to function. So we were approaching the book from very different points of view, and that led to a lot of tension. I remember saying I couldn't care less about, this letter that she found is just another detail, like we had to get more pages going. So writing the actual book took about 3 years, and we tried to be very fair. We passed every chapter back and forth at least 3 or 4 times to smooth everything out, make sure everyone was okay with everything. But in retrospect, that probably was unnecessary, and it was just, it was a learning experience. And
We both learned.
we're both very happy that
My friends remember, and Jessica, David's wife, certainly remembers.
Yeah.
It was an interesting process, but we both learned. Actually, I learned a lot from David about writing. He's very organized, and he made me read a book about playwriting backwards and forwards, which does really help with structuring a novel. And I'm the kind of writer where I have absolutely no outline, no notes. I just sit one day and start talking to myself, and then the notes come later. So maybe the collaboration
It was an
between the
odd
two
couple, yeah.
different, we were an odd couple.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, I just want to say there's a lot of responsibility when you write an historical novel, because every single fact has to be accurate. It isn't enough to say somebody wears a cap. You have to know what kind of caps are worn and what was the style. So I spent days looking online for historic sites on clothing of 1917. I had to look up newspaper headlines. What were the newspaper headlines on the specific dates that we were writing about? The boys who were 8, 9 years old who lived on the streets, the newsies who were up at the crack of dawn selling the papers. What kind of a life was that for kids? Every single thing had to be checked and double checked. What kind of telephone? Would it be on the wall? Would it be one of the newfangled ones that's on a stand that it has a hook for the receiver? Everything. And
One thing that I thought was really interesting, the time period is 1917, so there was a lot of new technology just emerging. Radio was brand new, and things that we would normally take for granted existed in a totally different technology back then. So I remember one part, we have the character at the bottom of a building in New York City, and we had no idea how they would let the 5th floor know that they were waiting for them at the locked entrance. They had speaking tubes. You would yell up into a tube, and it would be projected into the the parlor. I wish they still existed. It sounds like a lot of fun.
yeah, that was an interesting detail. So we're going to read a couple of passages, if that's okay with you. All right, I'm going to start off the book reading from the first chapter, because it really sets the tone for 1917 New York City. It's on the Bowery. Life is hard. The world is at war. People don't have money. And kids like Leo, our hero, are on the street pulling cons. They're picking pockets and they've got schemes. And you're going to read about the scheme that he does. A small crowd had formed in front of Pershing Wadlow's Wonder Museum. The stained and torn banner stretching the width of the building advertised the attractions. Amazing things were promised. A two-headed lady, a genuine mermaid from the far-flung coast of Fiji, a woman with a beard down to her waist, an alligator girl. Without ever having seen the exhibit, Leo knew the mermaid was only a stuffed monkey stapled to a fish. The bearded lady was really a man in a dress, and the alligator girl's skin was plastered with thick glue that had dried and cracked. Rattling cold steel bit at his back through his thin black coat. He glanced up and saw through the slats of the tracks the mechanical guts of the 3rd Avenue L train as it came to a stop. The usual lot came filing down from the train. Sailors in bell-bottom trousers practically running to the closest saloon. A few sad-looking men searching for a pawn shop to sell whatever gold they had for next to nothing. Some ordinary folks mixed in as well, just looking for a new hat or a cheap suit. The Bowery was no ritzy neighborhood, but Leo was comfortable working there. It was easy for him to blend in. The last person to descend the grade pavement was Murph. That's one of the boys in his gang. Under his open jacket, he looked like a strip of jerky. His suspenders hung loosely over a plain white shirt, holding up baggy pants hiding deep pockets. A newspaper carried by the wind whipped around his feet. He shook it away and passed by Leo, giving him the nod. Leo left his post and crossed the street. He settled near the back of the crowd. A talker, that would be a barker, you would call in those days, a barker would be a talker. A talker dressed in a shabby tuxedo rushed out of the doorway of the Wonder Museum. He stepped up onto a low platform, twisted the ends of his mustache into points, and adjusted his bow tie. "Start talking already," Leo shouted out. "Ladies and gentlemen," the talker began. "Louder," Leo yelled. "Ladies and gentlemen," the talker said louder, "presenting Dolly Dimples." A woman in tight corkscrew curls with rouged cheeks and a body like a rhinoceros wobbled through the door and onto the platform. The wood creaked under her footsteps. She was dressed like a little girl in a pinafore and carried a doll. She pouted, then turned around and flipped her ruffled skirt to the audience. The talker waved his hands like a symphony conductor. "Our Dolly Dimples was a beautiful baby. She's now the great fat lady. Don't make her mad, or she'll make you sad. Earn your worth. Guess her girth. Free admission if you're right." "300 easy," somebody yelled. "Bigger, 350, another yelled. A stagehand wheeled an industrial-sized detector scale onto the platform. The talker cued Dolly Dimples, and she stepped onto the scale. The needle swung across the face of the dial, but before it could register her weight, a man standing in front of Leo cupped his hands to his mouth, about to yell out the answer. Murph and Leo had passed Pershing Wadlow's dozens of times, and they had seen the man now standing in front of Leo guess Dolly Dimples' weight every single time. The scale was fixed, like everything else at the Wonder Museum. The man was a shill planted in the crowd to get people warmed up and ready to fork over their dimes. Everyone likes a winner. Just as the shill took a lungful of air, Leo kicked him hard in the back of his knee and he stumbled. 437 pounds and not 1 ounce more, Leo yelled. The needle stopped and the talker pointed into the crowd. "A winner! We have a winner! You there! The small gentleman in the brown cap. You, sir, must be a genuine clairvoyant. Come inside, come inside. Your admission to our curio hall of curiosities is free." Leo pushed through and went straight up to the platform. The talker dangled the ticket in front of Leo's face. "What's the big deal?" he said through his teeth. "What's the big idea?" he said through his teeth. "Idea?" Leo said loudly, watching Murph circle the crowd while all eyes were fixed on Leo. "No idea at all. I'm just a good guesser. Ask anyone between the Hudson and the East River, and they'll say I'm the best guesser they've ever seen put up against a conundrum. The Sphinx himself is no match." No riddle is too twisty or too tough. Really, it's not my fault. My Aunt Gertie was one fat lady. She was from Rochester, never got out much. So you see, Mr. Talker, with all due respect and deference, etc., to what you're doing here, a good guess isn't really a good guess at all. It's just putting two and two together. You're quite the talker yourself. After you come out the other end of the museum, I'm not going to see you around here again, understand? Leo smirked and turned to go inside, waving the ticket high in the air. With his free hand, he retrieved a small piece of soap from his pocket. Right before he got to the entrance of the museum, Leo stopped. He made a fake cough and popped the soap into his mouth, working it into a lather with his tongue. The bitter taste made him spit up a little. When his mouth was so foamy it was overflowing with bubbles, he turned back to the crowd, which was now lining up to pay for tickets. People began to stare. "Oh, my, are you all right, boy? Poor thing is having a fit. Someone get help. He's convulsing. He's gone mad." Leo started to shake and jerk as if he'd been struck by lightning. He rolled his eyes and fell to the crowd, kicking and moaning the whole time. I'm going to stop there because, there are spoilers. But that was a perfect con of the time, putting soap in your mouth to make it appear as if you're having a fit. And while he's doing that, all eyes are on him. His accomplice Murph is in the crowd, and it's payday. So in that one chapter, you see the setting, the time. You learn something about the wonder museums, which are called dime museums. People would spend a dime for an hour or so's worth of entertainment. That was 1917 in New York City. So David, I thought maybe we'll just do this, and then we'll just do this.
Right. So what happens next, basically, is that Leo and his gang get into a close call with the police, and he decides to part ways. He doesn't want to be a pickpocket anymore. He'll do anything else. And his gang of friends doesn't like that, and they betray him. He gets put in jail, and then he basically escapes.
From the tombs.
From the tombs, which still exist. It's still a prison today in downtown Manhattan. And he picks the pocket. He can't go totally on the straight and narrow yet. He's got no money. He picks the pocket of a magician, and he's got a calling card in there next to an advertisement looking for a magician's apprentice. So it's a perfect opportunity for him, and he sets out to meet the magician, and they set up a meeting in the magician's apartment, and they decide to have a go. But unfortunately, Leo still has the magician's wallet, so he's very nervous that if he gets caught with a wallet, this guy's going to know that he's.
And this is my favorite passage in the book. David wrote this back. We don't really say who wrote what, where, when, because we tried to make the book as uniform, one voice, not two different people writing. But I will say David wrote this passage. I didn't have any input in it, and it's actually my favorite passage in the book.
I didn't know that. Thank you.
Yeah, well.
He sat up in a panic. Barzini's wallet lay at the bottom of his knapsack next to his cash. Not ditching the wallet was a sloppy mistake. What if Barzini went snooping through his new assistant's possessions? He pulled $30 from the banded bills and put the cash in the wallet. Then he left his room and entered the dark hallway in his bare feet. Leo had to plant it in the apartment, someplace not too obvious, maybe sticking out of the cushions of a chair or behind a stack of magazines. That way the magician would think he absent-mindedly misplaced it himself. Leo felt the walls for a light switch. Halfway down the hall, a lamp suddenly turned on. Light showered over Barzini's folded hands, resting on his lap. His face was in darkness. Leo quickly stuffed the wallet into the back of his pajama pants. "I see you're having trouble sleeping. Sit with me, let's talk." There was a sharp, sweet scent of alcohol in the air. Leo walked over and sat in the chair across from Barzini. His heart was racing and his throat was dry. Barzini's face was still hidden in the shadows. "You're probably a little curious about me. Don't be. But I am curious about you, Leo. You remind me of someone from long ago, an orphan just like you. And I envy you for that, Leo, if you can believe it, because you can choose who you are. Who are you, Leo? Are you a German Leopold, an Italian Leonardo, a Russian Leon, an English Lionel? Maybe you could be Leo the Magnificent. I don't know yet. He unfolded his hands and brought them to his face. He leaned forward into the light with his palms covering his eyes. Sometimes I look into a person's eyes and they are just dead, nothing there. But other times I see someone like you, someone who I could make into something. He uncovered his eyes. Go to sleep, now. Leo got up and moved towards his bedroom. Wait, one thing first. Leo turned. Leave my wallet on the kitchen table. I didn't, Leo started. I don't tolerate lying. But how? That ad was never placed. You and I are the only two people who could have possibly known about it. It took a minute for Leo to process this information. Then why am I here? Why would you hire me when you knew I was a thief? A good question. Are you going to kick me out? Leo asked. No, but you're free to leave if that's what you want, Barzini said. You're here because you picked my pocket in broad daylight, without my feeling a thing, and without anybody noticing. That is a talent. So I'm offering you an opportunity to develop that talent in a legal way. A magician must be dishonest, deceptive, manipulative with his audience. These are qualities you already possess. Thanks, I guess, Leo said. I do want to stay, please. One last thing. If you are not sincere in your desire to turn your life around, to become someone of importance and respect, then it will be soon obvious, then it will soon become evident, and things will not work out between us. You cannot hide that from me. I will know what's squirming in your dirty little heart and the thoughts that toss in your indecent head. And if you try to steal from me again, it could be a penny or an extra lump of sugar. I will send you into a world of misery that you cannot imagine. I do not tolerate theft. It is the worst possible crime. Barzini turned the lamp off. Sleep well, Leo. Your lessons will begin early. Leo left the wallet on the kitchen table and went to his room. On his bed, he stared at the ceiling. Seconds turned into minutes, minutes turned into hours, and still his chest was tight. What had he gotten himself into?
Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask us?
How long did
The
it take you to
boy,
write?
the young man
How long
standing
did it take you to
there.
write the book?
Okay, David, tell Michael, the nice young boy over there.
It took us about 3 years from start to finish. So we had this previous manuscript that we'd worked on a couple years before, but really we didn't keep any of it. Two characters remained from this totally different piece, but the plot, the time period, everything was completely different. So from the time we really started sitting down and creating an outline and writing chapters, it took 3 years. It's a long time.
A lot of rewriting.
Yeah.
A lot of rewriting.
Is that your first book?
It's no, I've ghostwritten a couple books, so it wasn't my first time doing the process, but this was a unique challenge. And my first book with my name on it, so I'm very.
That's
And with his mother.
Oh, you're his mother?
Yes, the young lady.
Did you find that you needed to do more research as you went along with writing?
Yes.
I love research. I used to love doing term papers in school. I loved them. And I wanted to be an archivist originally. So if I would look up something and it interested me, whether I was going to use it in the book or not, I needed to know more. I needed to know, like, what was on menus in restaurants. How much did a meal cost? David was great. This was extra research we did. When we had the gang travel around New York City, he was very good on the neighborhoods. I mean, I lived in New York a long time ago. He lives in New York now. But he was very good on researching the trolley lines and which subways were actually in existence in 1917, which lines were running. So that he did that. That was great. You got through the New York Public Library. A lot of research
Right.
through the library.
I think I read 600 pages on this really dry, these really dry old books from the era, from the early 1900s, on how to do sleight of hand, which I'm terrible at. I'm all thumbs, but I did practice, and these books were practical manuals for people who want to be magicians. So they were really thorough.
They were how-tos.
Yeah.
So he did a lot of the magic reading, a lot of the subway stuff. I did other stuff because I would like, as I said, if they had to make a phone call, well, how did you make a phone call in 1917? What did the inside of the abandoned tenements look like? Going to the site for the tenement museum was very good for that. So we really just dug and dug and dug. I mean, I could have dug for another year, but I think no.
You can dig on your.
Yeah, my next book I'll dig. Yes.
You said that you wanted to be historically responsible.
Yes.
What did the editors then also do? Checking to see that you were?
Copy editors. Well, the editor does. If the editor, when you finish a manuscript, I mean, we sent it to our editor 3 separate times, and she made preliminary notes. You don't copy edit at all at that stage of a book. It's more like she would take a page or a paragraph and say, character development is off here, think about this. It's more from the story point of view. But once you submit the final draft, the editor reads it once, she makes her comments, then it goes to a professional copy editor. They don't just copy edit it in terms of punctuation and grammar, they also fact check. And one thing I remember that came up very early on when the gang goes to New York City, and I had to do the research on what train lines ran between Buffalo and in this abandoned tenement, we have a scene where they're lighting like a gas flame little hot plate. So her comment was, were there hot plates in 1917? So I had to dig, and I found something. It was, it's not like what I had in college, but it was, I didn't go to college in 1917, but it was it was some kind of a crude thing with a pipe that would connect to wherever the gas came into the building. And so it did exist. And I think there were 1 or 2 other things where they questioned the historical accuracy. We actually have in the book a New York Times article that says that when Houdini will be hanging in Times Square upside down in a straitjacket, I had to get permission to use that, even though it was kind of before the date of copyrights. It was still the New York Times, and nobody wants to get in trouble and then have to put, So you have to be really careful or get permissions. But there were probably some other examples where I had to actually super double check, but I can't remember. Yes, any other? This young lady over here.
How did you guys divide the writing and the work, and how did you make it sound like one voice?
Once we had the outline, which evolved after about a year, but the basic concept of the story, we wrote the chapters sequentially and alternated each chapter, more or less. I mean, it wasn't perfect. And then once the chapter was done, it went to the other one for notes, and then back for revisions. Each chapter went back and forth like 5 or 6 times. So it was very cumbersome way to go about things. We thought it would be the most fair, but it was actually just doubling everyone's
It
work.
was really
So,
difficult.
yeah.
It's a sloppy way of doing a book, but it was important, and in the end I let the content was equal, but I wanted David's voice to kind of be the one that would roll over everything, because not that a mother of 39 can't write about, I said that verbally, can't write a book about a 14-year-old. Anybody can get inside anyone's head. But David will say, I'm sure, that one of his objectives when we decided to write together was that he wanted to write a book that he would have liked to have taken out of the library when he was a middle grade young adult reader. And so I felt that he would best understand how to roll the voices to make everything smooth, and so that was his stamp, and I couldn't have done it without him. I did bribe him with cookies and
Yes.
with care packages that was sent, you know, like when we really weren't speaking. But we worked that out.
Yeah.
We worked that out.
How tough would a collaboration like this have been before the internet and Microsoft Word?
Oh man,
Yeah.
you'd have to actually probably physically work together every
Right.
day. I mean, that
Yeah.
that would have been really hard.
We wouldn't have done it.
Hey,
No,
Yeah.
we
Would've been
did
tough,
on the
yeah.
first draft that was not publishable.
But we were sitting, you know.
I would sit up in his room, which is now my room, and we would kind of work. I mean, I would write longhand, and he would type it up, and we would discuss things, and then he would get annoyed with me for putting my feet up on his desk. It was hot in the room, and I had to go down, and then he had to take a lot of coffee breaks and stuff.
Yeah.
So that's how we had a good summer. It was fun,
Yeah.
sort of.
But yeah, that's how we did it all. We sent everything
back and forth.
Back and
I
forth.
can't imagine how you do without.
I
Yeah.
mean, you'd have to physically
Yeah.
sit together. Yeah. Any other questions?
So what are you working on now?
Well, I want to do a bunch of things, but I am working on a new novel, and I'm going back to a totally different style, which is what I did with my first novel, and have it, what?
When your first novel?
Well, Your Friend in Fashion. First person, I like writing in first person. I don't have to stretch too much in first person. It's right on the surface. And it'll be about two friends and betrayal when it's most painful, which is in adolescence. And it's a book also about, I hope, because it's just in a formative stage, so you say hope. It's a book about secrets and how betrayal and exposing secrets can have really, really enormous consequences. So that's kind of all I got now, because I could tell you more detail, but it could change tomorrow. So, but I want to spend the next year writing this. Yeah, that's what I want to do. And David, I don't know.
Well, I like YA, and I actually liked, writing for that age group. But primarily, I write more for adults. So I work full time in publishing as well. So I work on a lot of short stories, just because there's less time commitment and emotional commitment. So I've got an idea for something longer, which I've been kicking around, but I've been writing mostly short stories.
And
One's should be out in a magazine, a journal called West Branch. Bucknell University. It gets distribution. I don't think it's been shipped yet, but you can find it on the
it's a literary.
newsstand over there. Yeah, literary magazine.
So his first short stories in that. But I have really his first short stories in the book, in the collection. You know, newsflash.
Oh no.
Mom is hot today.
You said you weren't going to do this.
Newsflash. Graham is in a mood today.
What?
I'll show you. I have it.
He's still in the mood.
He's still in the mood. Graham is in a mood today.
I had a family newspaper.
Yeah. Mom is hot today.
It was August.
Yeah. So, any other questions? Thank you all for coming.
They're really big. It's a big office, and it's in downtown.
And then,
Just like getting acclimated.
She's my old friend.
Started, but now it's like teaching, and they kind of like revamped it, so it's like pretty intense, and it's like a big, like, you know.